Good evening, I'm Psychiatrist Jay Fawver, live from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Now in its 27th year, Matters of the Mind is a live call-in program where you have the chance to choose the topic for discussion. So if you have any questions concerning mental health issues, give me a call in the Fort Wayne area by dialing 969-2720, or if you're calling anyplace else coast to coast, you may call toll-free at 866-969-2720. Now on a fairly regular basis, I am broadcasting live every Monday night from our spectacular PBS Fort Wayne studios, which lie in the shadows of the Purdue Fort Wayne campus. And if you'd like to contact me with a question that I can answer on the air, you may write me via the internet at Matters of the Mind, all one word, at WFWA.org. That's Matters of the Mind at WFWA.org. And I'll start tonight's program with a question I recently received. It reads, Dear Dr. Fawver, my grandson, who's 21 years old, has been diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and has had difficulty holding a job. He's used marijuana and alcohol and had scrapes with the police. He's not been willing to stay on medication, seek counseling, or life coaching. Currently, he seems to self-medicate with alcohol. Is there anything that can help him? There's a lot of things that can help him, and it's always the chicken or the egg phenomenon. Alcohol and marijuana will typically make underlying ADHD worse, but you might wonder, well, why does somebody use alcohol and marijuana when they have ADHD? It's because of the underlying anxiety, because ADHD will cause people to procrastinate, they get behind, they're misplacing things. It creates a lot of anxiety, so many people at a young age, often as an adolescent, will start using marijuana, which makes people not care. And since they don't care, they just feel better. And sometimes ADHD will actually help people feel happier. And the ADHD treated with marijuana will actually make people feel happier. It's not a good phenomenon to have, because when you have ADHD and you use marijuana, it actually slows the growth of the front part of the brain. So marijuana suppresses the white matter growth of the brain. White matter is like the brain's natural insulation. And the bottom line is it will cause ADHD to be worse, especially if you're under 24 years of age. At the age of 24 years old, that's when the brain is fully developing in the front. So as the brain's still growing, if you're using marijuana, it suppresses the growth. So at 21 years of age, your grandson is not helping his brain out by using marijuana or alcohol. So the key would be to try to help him get the proper treatment to deal with the anxiety that is leading to his being self-medicating with the alcohol and marijuana. Now, I'd wonder if he doesn't stay on medication, chances are he's not been on medications that have helped him. It's the same with nearsightedness. If somebody can't see things at a distance, if they get the right eyeglasses or the proper corrective lenses, they want to wear their glasses. They want to wear their corrective lenses. You don't have to remind them. If you give them eyeglasses that are uncomfortable, they don't fit well, they don't have the proper lens strength, and they can't see that much better, they don't want to wear eyeglasses. The same for ADHD. If somebody is on a treatment that's not helping them that much for their focus and concentration, and they're still feeling a lot of anxiety, they're often going to medicate themselves with alcohol and marijuana. Once they've reached out and tried those different things, at least they don't care about things so much, so the anxiety they're experiencing doesn't bother them so much. The problem is, in the long run, it's not a good long-term solution. So we have medications for ADHD that are non-stimulants that actually do a particularly good job for anxiety. There are medications that are stimulants that, if you help with the focus and concentration, often the anxiety will subside. So there's a lot of different medication treatment options out there. There's coaching options that your grandson could have in terms of helping with the anxiety itself. But I would really emphasize to your grandson that, hey, up to the age of 24 years old, his front part of the brain is still growing, and alcohol and marijuana can give him detrimental outcomes such that he might have difficulty with brain development long term. We used to think that if somebody simply stopped marijuana and alcohol before the age of 24 years of age, they wouldn't have long-term difficulties. Now it appears that you can still have long-term problems if you used marijuana and alcohol extensively before the age of 24 years old, because your brain is extensively growing at that time. Thanks for your email. Let's go to our first caller. Hello, Cheryl. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Well, Cheryl, you had mentioned you're a teacher. You're out of school for the summer, but you're still having a lot of anxiety. Going to be underlying issues. Cheryl, as a teacher, I'd like to thank you for your service, just like I would thank somebody in the military, because I know it's tough being a teacher. Now, as a teacher, I'd wonder, are you a relatively new teacher? Are you a teacher who's very experienced? Your source of your anxiety, was the anxiety due to this particular group of students? And sometimes that anxiety will carry over. It's kind of like a traumatic event where if you've had a lot of anxiety due to ongoing trauma for a period of time, sometimes even when the trauma has been eliminated or no longer exposed in your life, you will still have anxiety that will kind of carry over. So that could be some of the issue. The other issue I'll hear with teachers will be they will be kind of anxious in the summer because they're wondering what they're going to do. It can be a relief that they're out for the summer, but they're kind of uncertain and they have that lack of structure during the summer months. And then some teachers will start to feel anxious even in the month of June, about what's going to happen next August and September with the new school year. And they start feeling anxious about the plan, about the new class of students and so forth. So I think the key would be to try to identify the source of the anxiety right now and try to deal with that the best you can, knowing that next school year will be hopefully different with experience, with your wisdom of the years of experience you have year by year by year. That should help mitigate the anxiety because you'll have that experience behind you. I would strongly suggest that you contact and stay in close communication with other teachers over the summer and kind of share war stories and share coping strategies to try to maintain all their stress resiliences to get through the summer and be able to better cope with next fall. Cheryl, thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Craig. Welcome to Mayor's the Mind. Craig, you want to know what's the treatment for poor impulse control? I think the treatment for poor impulse control, Craig, would be to try to identify what's causing the poor impulse control. There's many different things that will cause people to do things and say things that they ordinarily shouldn't or wouldn't do or say. So if the poor impulse control is due to a street drug, that's kind of a no-brainer. If it's due to alcohol, if it's due to a stimulant, if it's due to narcotics, and when you use those substances of abuse, you get yourself into trouble, okay, you need to address these substances of abuse that might be causing the poor impulse control. If the poor impulse control is very episodic and just here and there, and it's not related to drug use, the poor impulse control could be related to a mood disturbance like bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder will be manifested where people have manic highs and then they crash into lows. During the manic highs, people will speak faster, they won't need to sleep, they'll have poor decisions during that time. And during that time, they'll have the impulsivity with the bipolar disorder itself. There's also a phenomenon called ADHD. We talked about that earlier with the 21-year-old grandson with ADHD. ADHD, the H means hyperactivity and also alludes to poor impulse control. If you have ADHD on a day-to-day basis, you can have impulsivity. There's a phenomenon that's a mood disturbance. They call it borderline personality disorder. It's where people will have moodiness and impulsivity kind of on a day-to-day basis, but it's very much provoked by environmental and interpersonal stimuli. So when stuff is happening in the environment or you're having interpersonal relationships that are stressful for you, that can cause a person to be more impulsive if you have borderline personality disorder. And finally, there's a psychotic disturbance, schizophrenia, for instance, that will cause people to lose contact with reality. And during that time where they're psychotic and they're losing contact with reality, you can have more impulsivity and at that time do things and say things that are out of the ordinary for you. So there are various types of disturbances with impulsivity, and it's based on the type of those disturbances that we would try to address the actual problem itself. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next email question. Our next email question reads, Dear Dr. Fawver, my anxiety level has increased dramatically recently. To lower my anxiety, in addition to my medication, would it help at all to try essential oils? I've seen them advertised on TV and the people claim they've gotten good results. The issue with essential oils is they are difficult to study, and it's very much anecdotal reports like you're hearing on the TV advertisements, because people will say essential oils will give them a calming effect. Lavender, lilac, all sorts of different smells, peppermint can be helpful, but how would you study it? How do you get a placebo essential oil? Because it's very difficult to do that. You know that you're getting the scent or not. So if it's a medication in development, for instance, you get the medication versus placebo that looks just like the medication, and you have half a group take the real drug and the other half take the placebo, and you figure out who's going to do better. With essential oils, it's difficult to study, so it's very anecdotal. And the bottom line is, if you feel like it's giving you benefits, not only short-term but long-term, that's great. And the good thing about essential oils, they often aren't harmful unless you're using a delivery system that is giving you a toxic effect on the lungs. My biggest concern about essential oils will be the oils themselves. If you breathe them in, they can give you a very toxic effect on the lungs. We used to think, oh my goodness, 30 years ago that vaping seemed like it was relatively safe, and then it was discovered that the vaping devices themselves could release chemicals into the lungs that literally would coat the lungs and cause you to have significant respiratory problems. I've heard the same issues on occasion with essential oils, so it's just very important to be careful about the delivery device of the essential oils. But otherwise, it's very anecdotal. If it seems to help you, that's great. A placebo effect will last for maybe 4 to 8 weeks at the most. In other words, something that has a placebo effect might help you for a while, then it kind of fades in its effect. If it's not a placebo effect, it should give you long-term benefits. So that would be where you'd use the essential oils themselves. But if you use them appropriately and they don't give you respiratory problems, they can have potential for anxiety and giving people a calming effect. People will use them sometimes for sleep as well. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Tracy. Welcome to Mayor's the Mind. Tracy, what you wanted to know what's it mean to have no childhood memories. It's difficult to say, Tracy. I wouldn't make that a diagnostic implication. You could always speculate that if you have no childhood memories, you must have had bad stuff happen in your childhood. Maybe, but maybe not. So you can't make that a diagnostic assessment. If you have no childhood memories, sometimes it's because things happen in your childhood where you couldn't articulate those memories well enough into your brain. For instance, if you had difficulty with verbal development, it's your verbal development and your ability to articulate thoughts that lead to memories as a child. That's why typically you won't have memories of a child as a child before you're able to speak. So as you're able to speak, you're able to have verbal articulations of those memories. Verbally, you can then download those memories into your memory center. So perhaps you wouldn't have that many memories as a child because you couldn't think through the memories to be able to download them into your brain. Also, something else that happens as your brain grows, there's a phenomenon called apoptosis where you actually have a shriveling up of neuron branching that's no longer necessary. So does your brain perceive that those memories you had as a child weren't that important to be able to retain? If that's the case, those little neurons kind of shrivel up and you don't have those memories anymore. That's not a problem necessarily. That just means your brain's trying to free up more space for current memories. So for some people, they won't have that many memories of events that might have occurred that other people in their family or their friends might have recalled very well. You might not have recalled those types of memories because your brain didn't perceive that it was important enough to be able to retain. So some memories we just kind of push aside. They can sometimes be stimulated with certain recollections to come back, but it's not a diagnostic issue if somebody doesn't have memories. I remember 30 years ago, there was a phenomenon called false memory syndrome where people were talking to therapists about these very issues, either not having memories as a child, having dreams about family members who might have been abusive to them. Therapists inadvertently back in the 1990s were telling patients at that time, oh, you must have been abused. You must have experienced trauma. That is really irresponsible, and it was found to be irresponsible. And that's the whole phenomenon of false memory syndrome. It's where your memory might be symbolic of something else that happened, but it's not necessarily deterministic that something did happen. And it was very harmful to a lot of families when these therapists were telling patients at the time that because they didn't have memories as a child, they must have been traumatized. Because they were having violent nightmares, they must have been traumatized. You can't make that kind of assessment. Your brain will do things very abstractly and very symbolically sometimes. And lack of memory, it's not diagnostic at all. It just means that for whatever reason, your brain has thrown those memories aside for the purpose of clearing up extra space. Our computers, we do the same thing. When we try to free up space on our computers, what do? You free up the space by getting rid of stuff you no longer use and don't need anymore. So if you don't need to utilize past memories from childhood to a great detail, yeah, your brain will pretty much delete them and put them off to the side. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Donald. Welcome to Mayor's the Mind. Donald, you want to know what are the signs of clinical depression and what ways can you intervene with early intervention? Clinical depression is a phenomenon where you'll have either sad mood or difficulty with enjoying things day by day for at least 2 weeks. And along with that, you can have various symptoms such as difficulty with sleep, energy, concentration, motivation, enjoying things, self-esteem, and even having suicidal thoughts. Some people, when they get depressed, will overeat. Some people will undereat. Some people will get really slowed down their movements. Some people get really agitated. The bottom line is you have these kind of symptoms day by day for at least 2 weeks, and if they cause you problems in your daily life, such as going to work, socializing, getting along with other people, if we're causing you problems in your daily life, we call that functional impairment. So having the symptoms with functional impairment will give you what's called a clinical depression. Now, what's the significance of a clinical depression? It means that it's probably worth treating either with psychotherapy or with medication. There are advantages to either of them. With psychotherapy, you can hopefully identify underlying problems that might have contributed to the underlying clinical depression. However, I always want to warn people that there's not always a reason. Back when I was in training in the 1980s, it was always thought, okay, we got to find a reason why somebody's depressed. Sometimes people are just depressed because they wake up on a Tuesday morning and they're getting depressed and they stay depressed for a period of time. About 30% of clinical depression is genetic. So some of it will come on based on genetics. Some of it will come on because you have underlying medical comorbidities that will often contribute to depression, like sleep apnea, low thyroid, low iron, diabetes. Other medical conditions can contribute to depression. We will often try to sort out other things that might have led to the clinical depression. If you've had some worries in your life, the worries often will lead to insomnia because you're staying awake thinking about stuff, and then insomnia will often lead to depression. So you often see this cascade of anxiety, insomnia, and depression for many, many people. So clinical depression is serious enough where you want to do something about it. Why do you want to do something about it? Because if you have ongoing clinical depression where it's functionally impairing, not only does it affect your whole life, but it affects your brain. If you have ongoing depression, for instance, it's part of the brain here called the hippocampus, which is the memory center of the brain, starts to shrivel up. We've got 80 billion neurons in our brain, and each individual neuron has between 20 and 50,000 connections. So you've got this extensive network in your brain. In the hippocampus, you have about 50,000 connections on each individual neuron. And when you have clinical depression that's going on day by day, it's those little neurons start to shrivel up. So it looks like a plant that hasn't been adequately fertilized or watered. The little neurons start to shrivel up, and then they don't communicate as well. And that's why older people over 65 years of age, with a clinical depression are 4 times more likely to develop dementia. Because dementia, well, the source of it is right here in the hippocampus. It starts to shrivel up for various reasons. Depression will do that as well. So a risk factor for dementia for older people will be depression. So that's why it's very important for older adults to be able to get treated for depression so it doesn't cascade into clinical depression itself. But clinical depression does tend to shrink up certain parts of the brain. We used to think that that was because neurons were dying. Now we realize neurons aren't dying. It's just that they're getting inadequate fertilization from the natural brain fertilizer, and they're shriveling up with less branching. So under some scans, it looks like certain areas of the brain are shrinking. They're shrinking because there's less fluffiness to the individual neurons, and making the actual size of that particular part of the brain appear to be shrinking. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, James. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. James, you want to know what happens to your brain with dissociative identity disorder, and can a person be cured? People can be treated and controlled with dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, James, and it's typically provoked in early childhood with a traumatic event. So a traumatic event that led to a person kind of needing as a coping mechanism to zone out from what was happening around them will often occur. And dissociative identity disorder will occur when somebody's having differences in their personalities based on adult stressful events that might not have anything to do with stressful events as a child. So as a coping strategy that's kind of retained in the brain, and it's probably has its source in the hippocampus and the perihippocampal area, the hippocampal area beside there, this is where dissociation appears to be occurring for people. And when you're under stress, the stress itself might fire up this section of the brain that will cause you to zone out from your current reality and go into a different identity. So people who have dissociative identity disorder, it's very rare, but they'll go into this this for a few seconds or a few minutes, they'll go into this entirely different personality that might be unlike their usual personality, and it's a coping mechanism to be able to deal with stress. And again, the stress might be entirely different as an adult versus a child, but that's how they will automatically kind of zone out and go into that particular personality. When people go into that personality, they'll often say they lose track of a few seconds or a few minutes. It'll be very transient for a lot of people. Rarely will people have a change in personality that will go on for hours. It's just a few minutes at a time typically, and it's basically where their brain's briefly zoning out. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Karen. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Karen, you want to know, why does your brain hyper-focus on small things, but you often miss the big picture or find it difficult to refocus on tasks? There is a phenomenon, Karen, we've talked about it a couple times tonight, called attention deficit disorder, or ADHD with hyperactivity. When you have ADHD or attention deficit disorder, you can hyper-focus on things that are interesting, challenging, or exciting for you. They're relatively small, but you can really hone in on those different things. So when children have ADHD or ADD, for instance, they can focus for hours on computer games. They can focus on tasks that are interesting for them, but they'll often miss the big picture and have difficulty with overall tasks that might not be that interesting for them. So there's a possibility you might be describing ADD or ADHD, Karen. Another phenomenon will be with depression. When people have depression, they have a difficult time shifting their focus. They'll have trouble with being able to process information. They'll get stuck in this so-called default mode of the brain. Default mode of the brain will be where you're really not focused on the things happening around you with great clarity. You're just kind of in a zone and you're just kind of daydreaming. People will often have that experience when they're driving on a highway. It's called highway hypnosis, where you're not thinking real carefully about things. Yeah, you're aware of the traffic around you, but you're not highly focused on it. And next thing you know, you've driven several miles. You might have missed your exit just because your brain was kind of in this zone. And it's called the default mode of the brain, where you're not highly focused on something. Now, the default mode will be, it's like going from first gear to third gear. Third gear being the executive functioning mode, where the executive functioning mode is when you're thinking very intensely on something and you're very focused on something. To get to the executive mode from the default mode, you got to go through the salient mode, and the salient mode is basically the shift that takes you, like an old manual shift, takes you from the default mode into the executive mode. When people have clinical depression, they will have difficulty shifting their focus from that daydreaming, zoned out type of mode of thinking called the default mode. They have difficulty shifting from that to the executive mode, where they can concentrate on more things with greater clarity that are around them. So there are various reasons for that, but the reason that comes to my mind right off the bat would be if you're having trouble with hyper-focusing and focusing on relatively minor details without being able to see the big picture, that's more indicative for a lot of people with ADHD. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our next caller. Hello, Denise. Welcome to Matters of the Mind. Denise, you want to know what it means when a person gets excited, then they space out and go into a tremor-like seizure from early childhood. I wonder, in that kind of case, Denise, if you truly did have a seizure disorder, or that person with whom you're describing might have a seizure disorder, because with a seizure disorder, flashing lights or excitement can cause somebody to kind of briefly hyperventilate. When you hyperventilate, you can be more prone to having a seizure. The complex partial seizures, temporal lobe seizures, are very, very common for people in those kind of situations. There's also a phenomenon called narcolepsy. Narcolepsy with cataplexy is where somebody will have difficulty. They get excited, they laugh about something, and all of a sudden their knees buckle on them. And it's a phenomenon where there's a disturbance with hypocretin. Is a chemical, orexin is another name for that, but it's a chemical that basically will be disturbed if somebody has narcolepsy. And basically, if you have narcolepsy, your brain goes into dream sleep very quickly. And it does so when you are laughing or you have a very strong emotional response to something. So your brain's going into REM sleep very quickly, and you buckle at the knees. And for some people, they'll say it looks like a seizure because they will indeed collapse. So I'd want to be assessed either way by a neurologist with those kind of symptoms to determine if it's a seizure. Is it narcolepsy, which is where you would have sleepiness, not uncommonly, but that can be assessed. There's actually various blood tests and cerebral spinal fluid tests that can determine if you have narcolepsy or not. But I'd want to get that checked out if somebody was having those kind of symptoms. I wouldn't say that getting excited about something and having seizure-like activities, that's not a psychiatric condition. That's more of a neurological condition from what you're describing. Thanks for your call. Let's go to our last email. Our last email reads, Dear Dr. Fawver, I have really low self-esteem. What are some steps that I can do to build my confidence? I think it depends on how you define your self-esteem and who is your measure of self-esteem. Many times we will compare ourselves to other people, so you need to compare yourself to yourself and determine what your own goals might be, and go for little wins to develop your own self-esteem. Look at things that you're accomplishing as opposed to things that you're not accomplishing, and the last thing you should ever do is compare yourself to other people. That's where social media has been very destructive to the self-esteem of younger people, because everybody on social media is doing fantastically well, and they're all doing better than you. So it's important to not compare yourself to other people on social media. If anything, try to avoid social media as much as possible. Work on your own individual wins and compare yourself to yourself and your own progress in life as opposed to others. Thanks for your email. Unfortunately, I'm out of time for this evening. If you have any questions that I can answer on the air, you may write me via the internet at Matters of the Mind, all one word, at WFWA.org. I'm Psychiatrist Jay Fawver, and you've been watching Matters of the Mind on PBS Fort Wayne. God willing and PBS willing, I'll be back again next week. Have a good evening. Good night.
Cameron Psychiatry, providing counseling and care for those that may struggle with emotional and behavioral challenges. More information available at CameronMCH.com.